Nikola Tesla told us that his brain was only a receiver and that there was a core in the universe in which he knew existed that he could get his greatest thoughts and inspiration. Srinivasa Ramanujan, the great Indian mathematician, told us as such, as he gave us all his breakthrough mathematical formulas in which we derive string theory. The same was true of Rudolf Steiner, Edgar Cayce, and many others. Well, in fact, we know your body has about 6 to 8 other kilos of life forms living on your skin as nanobacteria, and they're oscillating with the cells in your body. And they're also very sensitive to your habits and what you do. And we can only hypothesize that there are various energetic life forms that are doing the same thing. Well, our guest today is a very fascinating one. He is my very dear friend, Hank Kraychir. He's a professor. He is also a Masonic scholar, an author, and teacher. And he will be joining us on the upcoming Egypt tour this March 2023. You don't want to miss that. Everybody come along with us. Hank has been teaching online and abroad for a long time. His lectures have been well received. In fact, I have lectured with him. He invited me out to the Scottish Rite Lodge over in Los Angeles, and we did a wonderful talk on all sorts of incredible subjects, and you can find it online. We covered everything from Albert Pike to the ancient artificers and the mysteries. It was absolutely amazing and very well received. So today I'm very excited to talk to you all about something Hank has been really digging into recently with his research, which are the elementals and looking into various influences and thought forms. And I want to tell you all about these amazing functional mushrooms I always mention. Go to neurobuddha.com, check them out. And when you're on the site, the coupon code ENOC20 gets you 20% off. And you can also go check out Light to Light Pyramids with our dear friend, Michelle Hood. It's amazing what Orgone energy can do for you when you research it. Now, Hank, so good to see you, my friend. Today, we have so many amazing subjects to get into, but I want to tell people a story about you, and it's probably best that you tell them in your own words, but this is absolutely amazing how, if you want to talk about the forces of the spirit world and synchronicities and the universe work, you had to go through quite an ordeal with a heart transplant quite recently.
If I may, before I delve into that, I'd like to let your audience know. I mean, of course, we've known each other for, I'm estimating some 10 years now or so.
Yes.
And of course, I consider you a friend, but I want to go on record. I don't think I'm alone in this. You know, I'm quite proud of you. I've seen you're on Gaia TV, the Travel Channel, mystery channels, and I've watched you organically grow within the field of the mysteries. You've got a fantastic network of people, and I just want to say I think you're a great spokesman for the mysteries, and honestly, doggone it, I'm proud of you.
Oh, thank you so much, my friend. That means so much coming from you, and I feel the same way. It's such an honor to call you a friend and a brother. And I think that it's just amazing what you share and what you do. You always deeply inspire me. And some people, they talk the talk, but you really walk the walk. When you're talking about researching the Jesus fast, and I talk to you, you're fasting a whole month and you're not eating anything. You're praying continuously. You take these things very seriously. And you're always exploring the deeper spiritual meanings of life. And this to me has brought me great inspiration, and you have given me incredible guidance from behind the scenes. So I just want to say I appreciate your friendship and all you do.
Well, it's mutual. Also, I'd like to give a caveat any interview I do. Of course, we'll talk a little bit about Freemasonry today. I'm, of course, Blue Lodge, York Rite, Scottish Rite, and various concordant bodies, and they've all been important to me in not only my religious and spiritual growth as an individual, and I try to share that knowledge, but I you know, we're a tolerant organization, but I want to go on record. I am not the authority on Freemasonry. I like to keep safe with my brethren. What we do, we're encouraged to share ideas as long as it's in the lines of our literature. But I do like to stay along the lines of some of the not only Masonic greats, right, but also, others, right? But of course, one of your favorites, Manly P. Hall, Albert Pike was mine, 33-degree Freemasons, but we've got Charles Ledbetter, we've got Helena Blavatsky, co-Masons, and Theosophists, and there are others. But Eliphas Levi, and the list goes on and on. Reuben Clymer. But what they did, they took the lead in, let's say, the last 200 years from Eliphas Levi in his book, The History of Magic, from 1860. Within that book, he said, we need to let the world know what this information is. We have a moral responsibility to educate people, if they're so willing to listen, of course. But we have that obligation to share this knowledge. So I want to say, I want to, we don't read as like we used to. The new medium today is videos. So I'm staying along that tradition. We do need to get this information out, okay? And I do appreciate the opportunity to talk about some of these things. And of course, when we go to Egypt, I'm looking forward to sharing and interacting with those who are attending. And I'm going to learn. I'm going to share knowledge with everyone else, and it's going to be a great experience. So
I love that, Hank. And I want to bring it back, though, to what we discussed at the beginning of the show, that you went through a heart transplant. And even the way the heart came to you is amazing. And that's something I've always been interested in, because when we look over at Gary Schwartz at the Heart Math Institute and others who have said, well, before something happens to you, you feel it in the heart. And when you're being born, you're like a heart that protrudes its tongue, and you form from that direction. Well, a lot of stories I've heard from people that have had heart transplants, they claim that the person that they've had a heart transplant from, they retain the memories and the abilities of the person that had the heart, which is fascinating.
Well, it's in the Bible. In fact, when I was in my room, I do want to give credit where credit is due to Loma Linda University Hospital here in California. It's a Christian hospital. They pray before their shift. They pray with you. They allowed my Masonic brothers, a Catholic priest and 33-degree Freemason, come in and pray with me. They opened the door up during COVID. They allowed him to come in and pray with me. So there's a lot going on here. But in the room, just outside the room, I think it was Jeremiah. I'll give you a new heart and a new soul. It's in the Bible, right? And it's awe-inspiring. So let me tell you about that event. But let me just say, especially in the beginning, it does impact you. You are a little bit different. You might have some visions, and I did as well. But my wife and people who know me, they say, yeah, it's you, but it's not you. Yeah, you're different. You're not quite the same. So to give support to what you said, yes, absolutely. But let me just say, I just want to make a couple points, and this will be a progress for our whole conversation today. About 2 years ago, I was rushed to the hospital. I'm a healthy guy. It literally made no sense to anyone. I was having acute heart failure. My left ventricle was collapsing. They told me that it was an unknown virus. We really don't know exactly what it is. But if you're spiritually inclined like I am, you study some of the greats, you realize that's kind of how the spirit world works. It's send you a message. Are you listening? Are you asking for help? And so forth. But again, that's a hypothesis. We don't know. But they essentially, they said, after about a week, 8 days or so, they said, Hank, you're a perfect candidate for a heart transplant. And I'm like, okay, because my heart, just before I went in for my operation, was down to 1.9%. They kept it around 10 with a heart pump down my chest to keep me alive. My heart now is at 70%, what they call that, infraction compression rate or something like that. But so I of course, I'm praying. Let me just say this. There are no atheists in a foxhole. When you're there, you are praying, you're meditating. And if you believe that there are entities of spirit, of course, directed by God, everything is directed by God. Let me make that clear. In his infinite wisdom, of course, he saved my life. I will tell you that a couple points. I remember, it was really funny. I got on the transplant list, and of course, we're all familiar with God created the universe in 6 days. The seventh day he rested. That's exactly what happened to me. Once I got on the list, 6 days later, I got my heart. And the seventh day, they put me in a coma. And I'll tell you about 8 and 9 in a moment. But I remember, and by the way, I walked out of the hospital in 33 days. Now, that's an important number in Scottish Rite Freemasonry, Kundalini. Jesus lived 33 years. When 33 comes up, if you're spiritually inclined, you pay attention. But anyway, so I remember asking the doctors after the operation, I said, well, what's the life expectancy of a heart transplant? And he said 7 years. I'm like, well, okay, well, it's better than the alternative. I'll take it. We're good. I said, well, what's the longest living recipient of a heart transplant? And he said 33 years. And I'm like, okay, let's
Wow.
I'm like, wait a minute, 6, 7, 33 again, twice, pay attention. But on day 8 and 9, this is because I remember talking to you before, literally the day before and a couple days after. I was kind of out of it a little bit. I was grateful to be alive, but a lot of times I could only stay awake for like 15 minutes or 20 minutes.
I remember that. You and I would talk for short spurts of time. I didn't know if this was going to be one of our last conversations every time we talked.
Well, when your heart's so low, they're like, Hank, why are you awake? Because sometimes I literally would be there with my family member and we'd be playing a game or something like that. And I'd fall asleep and they said, Dad, you were asleep for 20 minutes. I said, no, I've been here the whole time.
And you remember you and I had a deal, and I made the same deal with Jordan Maxwell and others, but I said, the deal was, if you go, come give me a sign, because we were so sure of it that you were literally on the doorstep.
But here's the deal. There were no dreams. Because what I found out later, they never put me under like they normally do for an operation. They kept me at a very shallow sleep state because they were afraid that I wouldn't come back if they put me way under. So because my heart was so weak. So I go, okay, fine. So I never went under. So the spiritual activity that we were predicting happened on day 8 and 9. And day 8 in particular, I had a quiet moment. Everyone's, just got me and the machines going off. I got all these wires and everything. And I look out at the sky. I look up, and then I look in the room, and I'm visited by no less than hundreds of thousands over 2 days, 8 and 9, of orbs for 2 days. I mean, they literally came.
Wow.
And they wanted to honestly just see God's handiwork. I didn't understand it at the time, but it's been a driving force. What happened? Why were there so many? Not just like 3 or 5 or, and I've seen them in the sky sometimes, 10 or 8, if the light is just right. But that time they're literally in the room, they're all over the place. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And to me, that was a sign. So that's been a guiding principle. So I remember asking, I also want to give credit. I want to thank the priests. I want to thank the bishop of the church I'm a member of. It's Celtic Catholic Church, a seminary. I am allowed. They actually encouraged me, and I'm learning Celtic Catholicism in a seminary with no commitment to be a priest, which is pretty cool. I'm not saying I will or won't. That doesn't really matter at this point. But I've learned a lot. But I remember asking, he's my Masonic brother, but he's also my priest. And I said, hey, Father, have you ever done an exorcism? He says, yeah, I've done several. And I said, well, tell me about it. And he says, it's very important that you have this spiritual cleanliness, this purity when you're going to do spiritual battle with an entity. And he says, because they will attach themselves to your thoughts, to you based on the vibrations that you get, based on, if you have a proclivity towards some aberrant behavior, for example. That's where this idea of priesthood spirituality or cleanliness comes from. And I said,
thoughts are magnetic.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really is a vibrational, right? That's why even just going to a spiritual retreat, you change the vibration of you and the spirits leave you alone. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So I said, well, tell me more. He says, well, one time he says, you know, they go in pairs. They don't go alone. They went in pairs. And he says there were orbs, not uncommon for orbs to appear. And I said, well, are they good or are they bad? I said, I'd really like to know, because at this time, he didn't know that I had seen orbs. And he says, well, he says, you got to understand that, and this is right in line with Paracelsus, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But he says, essentially, most spirits are benign, meaning that they respond to you. And this is where this idea of Helena Blavatsky talks about your private morality. If you are good, if you're pure, if you're not doing, the reason it's not so much the act itself of the aberrant behavior, is it changes your vibration. And it allows these spirits to attach themselves to you. And they create these, again, Helena Blavatsky called them bicorporal entities. They're living vicariously through you. Talks about it, other people talk about it. There are legions of them. You could have 100 or 1,000 of them around or in you, and you can't get rid of them.
And it's interesting because a lot of people that have practiced the Christian faith, they talk about what they call familiar spirits, and they will try to differentiate this. And this has always been a point of contention between those in the esoteric New Age community that talk about spirit guides and how they lump it all together. But can I ask you about what Paracelsus, whose real name was Philippus Areolus Theophrastus Bombastus Volthynum, that's why we call him Paracelsus for short. Can I ask you about
devout Catholic? Does someone make that clear? Devout Catholic. Which most esoterics were devout Catholics.
They claim he was a great alchemist too. He would sprinkle this white powder around everywhere, healing people. And he was a toxicologist and had so many other things at the time. But the one thing that's very interesting about him is that he talked about these elementals, you know, the sylphs, the salamanders, the gnomes, the dwarves, the undines, those of the fire and the water and the air and the earth. How does that relate outside of alchemy towards what you're talking about influences we have all around us?
Well, and in our second interview, the second part, we've scheduled the elementals. Now, he defined them: elementary, elementals, and disembodied. And the second section will talk about them. Right now, we're going to focus on elementaries.
So so you're differentiating elementals and elementaries.
Right. Now, and this is a good point. So this is an overarching theme. I think it's important that I tell people, you know, people get into the micro of all these religions, the mystery schools, and they say they were right, they were wrong, they were, you know, they're all this stuff. And may I suggest it's all lipstick? Okay. It really isn't important. What's important is a universal theme among all religions and all doctrines, the mystery schools, everything. They had one, basically two, but it's a guiding principle. And it's called the Arcanium, the Holy of Holies, the Holy of Holies, the Secret of Secrets. And this includes alchemy too. And basically what it is you're never, and this is what I was told, you're never alone. And the thoughts you have are not your own. And so out of that reaches all these philosophies and these sciences, and from the mystery schools to Catholicism, to Baptist, to Buddha, to all of it, they're all saying the same thing. They're just saying, hey, we've got a better way.
Well, do you remember Walter Russell? He had this amazing ability to lock himself into a bedroom, and he could learn any ability he wanted. If he wanted to learn about science, he wanted to learn how the Egyptians built the pyramids. If he wanted to learn about sculpting, he would lock himself in there and become a brilliant sculptor. And
he tapped into it.
Essentially, that's what Rudolf Steiner came up with. And I pronounce what Steiner did as anthroposophy. And a lot of people online will criticize my pronunciation at time to time, but he had a science of being able to tap into the mind to figure out things.
Correct. What I found by studying Freemasonry, okay, morals and dogma. Okay, let's just talk about this. Absolutely, Albert Pike. A dogmatic belief in morals, a belief in morals. Okay, Carl Jung said without the morality of religion, people will go insane. See, we have to think of the overarching theme between all these things that we're talking about. Because I'll hear people, well, you don't know about that. You don't know anything. I'm just like, wait a minute, you're attacking again. What's the overarching theme of everything that we're talking about? That every religion, everything that any philosophy, any science has ever come up, you're never alone, and the thoughts you have are not your own. If you look at it from that perspective, even my wife, first time I told it to her, and she goes, no, my thoughts are my own. Think about it. Like within a month, she comes back to me and she goes, you might be right. It's a shock to people to realize that there are these bicorporal entities that are living vicariously through you. And your only protection, this is again, that theme, is we know that morality changes you. All right. Again, we live in the West, like in a Masonic altar, we have the Holy Bible. We're not a Christian organization. You can have any book of moral instruction on that book, on that altar when you become a Freemason, but you cannot espouse a particular faith. But you can espouse the overarching idea of what I just mentioned to you. It's never mentioned in Freemasonry, but if you study Albert Pike's book, Morals and Dogma, and that's a lot of Christian groups will attack it because they say, oh, you're talking about paganism and everything. They're teaching the same thing. You're never alone, and the thoughts you have are not your own. Now, Christ is a demarcation point, even in the esoteric writings. That's important. But let's talk about thoughts just for a second. So we have, there's a theory out there. It's called the original thought theory. And essentially, it's throughout all, literally Masonic and esoteric writings, man has never had an original thought. An offspring of that would be the science of thought, which is, psychology, religion, and they kind of clump it all together. And they're trying to understand, why do people act the way they do? Well, all you've got to do, if we go with Carl Jung, with people that don't accept the idea of morality, which is ethics, you can call it natural law, you can call it anything you want. It's basically being the best you can be. Don't harm anyone else. Love thy neighbor. I know that this is all, here we are teaching Christianity. We'll get into that. But if you're not the best, like the priests going in to do exorcism, say what you will about Catholicism, they're really good at it. They're really 9 out of 10 times, if there's an exorcism, who do you call? One of the variant branches of Catholicism, because they've been doing it for 2,000 years. They understand that these entities, or for the most part, they respond to you. They'll do what comes natural to them, much like a wild animal, right? But remember, like a dog, I have an affinity for bloodhounds. They're a great spirit dog. They're big, they're bulky, whatever. That you could put your grandchildren's head in their mouth and they won't bite down. They're just a great dog. But what happens if you kick that dog? If you're bad to that dog will turn on you, right? But if you love that dog will in turn will love you. And especially when we get into the elementals, we'll talk about that. But the first line of defense, if I may suggest, or defense of attack, is the elementary. You got something to say? Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just saying
okay. I thought you were going to say something. Okay.
No, I was agreeing with you, because when we look around us, we're only seeing a very small, narrow band of light spectrum. We know there's things in the infrared. We know there's things in the ultraviolet. All around you at any time, you're swarming with other influences around you.
Absolutely. May I suggest there was, what was his name? Oh my God, Cliff High. I don't know if you know who he is. But anyway, I enjoy listening to him sometimes. And he will talk on the days when his father was in the military, the United States military operations and the Pentagon and a bunch of stuff. Anyway, he will talk about in the early 60s when they first developed those night vision. Apparently they were red and they had a certain frequency. They were telling about these one time where they're out in Vietnam and they're in these gunships and they have the night and they're doing a trial test. And all of a sudden the gunners start shooting around. And they're like, what are you shooting at? There's nothing there. And they're like, no, there's all these flying things around us. And so that was the early version. Now, of course, we know that the standard version you get today doesn't do much, but you can get special goggles so you can see aircraft in the sky and so forth. So we know that there is this invisible world. Paracelsus called it, they're at a different coarseness. The ether, a lot of people don't know what ether is. Ether is the space between me and the computer screen. In there is an infinite, according to Paracelsus, there's an infinite amount of dimensions and spirit types. And we'll get into that a little bit later, but we're going to talk about elementaries right now. So they're in and around you. Yeah. So anyway, so
I was just going to add to that. Not only are there thousands of other entities, but people who have been astral projectors, and those out yes. there like yourself who have all these out-of-body experiences, especially since you've had these incredible life-changing, life-altering events. When you go out there, you realize that there's even things like astral wildlife. There's disembodied entities. There's all sorts of influences we have around us at all time, and we don't realize it, that we're being influenced, and they might like something we're doing. Something Timothy Hogan told me is that a lot of these disembodied entities that get out of the body for a while, and they don't make the full crossover because maybe they don't want to face their life review or whatever they're delayed on Earth, which is what Exactly. Well, what I believe very much so is when you see these haunted houses on Earth. Garnet Schulhauser was talking about this in his books, that he said that when you have a haunted house over in England, let's say an old castle that is 300 years old, you have some entity rattling chains and going up in the hallways. That entity's guides are gently trying to tell it to leave and go, but it's trying to relive its life. And it might try to influence someone in that house because it's, like you said, living vicariously through them. It is trying to observe them. And eventually it will go. It will make its transition. But I think this is quite common. I think there's many people out there that will get that. And I also think what will happen also is if you go to a place where there's a lot of activity, let's say you go to a bar or something where you see a lot of bar fights and a lot of aggressive activity. Alcohol, we know, we call it spirits for a reason, because it's just like you extract something using alcohol. We know that these spirits traditionally were thought to influence people and have an impact on them. So the idea that you would have certain entities that might feed off of something, again, going back into Rudolf Steiner or even Robert Monroe, who was referencing Steiner and others, that you had this idea that there are certain entities that would leech off a loosh, a kind of an energy that would be created by certain destructive activities. You might get entities that like this sort of thing. And so they want to have what they would call an attachment. That's what they would call it, right?
Right. Absolutely. If I may, let's just do a quick overview and use Christ as a demarcation point. Because people don't want to, like, oh, we don't need Christianity today. We got science, or we got this. We're so much smarter. Well, okay, that's good. But may I suggest we take a broader look at this overarching thing? What do we know about the mystery schools? Okay, these were religions for the most part. They were competing religions, much like we have today. I like to call it the smorgasbord of religion. I mean, whatever fit your fancy, whatever God you want to do, you could. Some of it was good, some of it was bad. But may I suggest that a lot of the good ones, it was about that spiritual purity that, Pythagoras, everyone was doing. They were trying to cleanse the body of these evil entities and trying to find God, right? Without being influenced by these external activities. And remember, there's an element of our society, most people may ignore it. There's an element of our society that feels it, understands it, is repulsed by it, and sees it, and so forth. So of that element, or whatever percentage it is, maybe it's a third of the population, they go to church, they may seek the mystery schools, they may become a Freemason, they may get a Theosophist, or whatever they feel comfortable with to find is where they go. So there is a big portion of our population that does that. And we call that the mysteries today. So in the mystery schools, and Arthur Waite, he was a Freemason and a member of Golden Dawn. Now he made everyone thinks that's dark. No, they were just incredible spiritualists, and they used Christ as a demarcation point in the understanding of spirituality. And so he basically said, hey, at this point in the esoteric sciences, everyone will admit that Christ consciousness, you call it whatever you want, everything changed spiritually when Christ was brought in. Because prior to that, when I was a young man, we studied Greek and Roman mythology. Well, and I've done videos, we've talked about Egyptian mythology and Sumerian mythology and all that. It's the same thing. These were active entities that were playing themselves out with a certain element of the population who are receptive to that. Okay, so we know that exists, but as Waite said, Jesus changed things because now you have God incarnate and they fall behind him now. So you now have, I don't know, you can call, in general society, if you say a prayer, heaven forbid you should say Jesus Christ or wear a shirt, people go crazy when they say that. They literally, it's because the spirit inside of them doesn't like the fact that Jesus now is a power that they have to take second fiddle to.
Well, I would like to jump in on that one too, because people have often asked me, why do you think the spiritual iconography of, let's say, a cross? The cross is a very ancient symbol. We know it goes back, it's Proto-Hindu. It goes back to the Ankh in Egypt. It's a very powerful symbol, and it holds great power. And if you think about in religion, whether you believe in a being or an entity or not, thousands and thousands, millions, billions of people have prayed and align themselves with that energy. And we teach something in esoteric teachings as an egregore. It's like basically a cosmic internet, like a firewall that you have around you. That's why followers of a church or an order, they have this sort of a web. And that could be a very good thing if you're connected to an egregore of people, or it could be a dark thing. And I want to throw in with that on top, for people that maybe they have this stigma with certain religious titles and names. When you bring the teachings of Jesus into the picture, and we use the name Christ, one thing that Jordan Maxwell always used to tell me, he said that in his earlier days, and he was deeply involved with religious studies and scholarship, he used to always tell me that a religious scholar would be offended if you use the name Christ to refer to Jesus. But point in fact, the name Christ is from the Christos, and it's like an oil, anointing oil, like when we would think of Crisco oil. So the interesting thing in a recent conversation,
the colostrum oil of the head.
Yeah, the colostrum oil too, which relates. I was just going to throw this in. Right. Timothy Hogan was saying that we have another connection that he found in the ancient writings of when we go back into ancient Egypt, the priests, what they would do is they would also use crocodile fat to anoint the top of the head that would come down around the head, which simulated the feeling of when you open up the third eye and the crown chakra. And the crown chakra opens up and you have the opening of the colostrum oil and the awakening of the Kundalini. This is what it feels like. And it was supposed to simulate
Kundalini experience. Absolutely. It's a
right.
Kundalini. Yeah.
So when we talk about Christ consciousness, think about the overall embodiment of the oversoul and the energy of everything.
Right. Great. So here again, that overarching theme, we're never alone. The thoughts we have are not
exactly.
Our own. That is essentially, remember, the spirit world is teaching us all the time, right? We never had original thought. That's why a Christian will say that the Bible was inspired by God. Of course, the Bible says, quiet the voice and listen, quiet the noise around you and listen to God. Stop listening to the demons, right?
Right.
It's all around us, and it's in our esoteric writings, is that you can't, and when I get into the elementals, it will make more point. But let's go that demarcation point. Now, I like to call this, and I've been reading, I can tell you all the books I've been reading I'm in my third term of 6, and I'm going really fast. They're like, what? Slow down, Hank, slow down. I'm like, no, you don't understand me. I'm really into this. But there's an overarching theme that I picked up on in my seminary studies as well. And that is that I like to call it the rebranding. Now, the secular world say, oh, you were just copying. Well, what do we know about Alexandria, Egypt? We're going to talk more about that. But in Alexandria, Egypt, all the religions around the world came, and what did they do? They shared information, right? And of course, oh, we'll take this. No, we don't want that. We'll take this. Let's try this. This works. This is spiritually working. Let's try this. Often based on intent. And so we know that there was a sharing of knowledge in Alexandria, and around the world also as well. So I like to call it a rebranding. It's the same idea. We're just going to give it a little lipstick. And again, that lipstick idea, we're just going to pretty it up and call it our own. That's what was going on in the ancient world. And then literally we can see the rebranding of this overarching theme. We're never alone. The thoughts you have, you're not your own, into Christianity, using, and they'll say it again and again in the literature. They'll say, well, yeah, we like this. The ancient world, like the Celts in particular, their priestly class were called the Druids. And so, for example, go back to the father, about the orbs. He said, he goes, we took pictures and we blew them up. And he says, Hank, their faces on those orbs. And I go, you're kidding. So what do? I go to the internet and I'm looking it up and I'm like, other people pulled this up too. And they're literally faces on orbs on the internet. So they're actual entities that are coming through. And then in my seminary studies, they're talking about the spirit world is circular, right? It's all circular. And so what do we know about the Druids? Their temples were circular. We have in Freemasonry around the altar is preambulation, is a circuit. The chakras, if they're not moving, right? They say that again and again. If the chakras aren't moving, you're going to die. If any one of them is off, it messes with the rest. And so you've got to keep them moving as well. In the Bible, it talks about the walls of Jericho. What were they doing? They're going around. But the Hebrews did it. The Catholics did it. They would go around their crops and they would, have the incense and they'd be praying. And it's everything is circular in terms of the spirituality. So we're seeing a rebranding of the old, and Catholicism just says, oh yeah, that's a good idea. We're going to keep it going. It's a rebranding. How do I know this? Well, one of the books I have right here is the Dictionary of Saints, one of the books I had to take for a class. Let's pull up, Clement of Alexandria, less than 100 years after Jesus died. Okay, now this guy is great. He may very well be my patron saint. We're not sure yet. I'm still doing research. It's between him and Augustine. But what did he do? He was a student of the mystery schools in Alexandria. Then he joins Christianity, becomes a priest, becomes a bishop. His works is called the Works of Clement of Alexandria. It's a big book. Go in there, and what is he doing? He's talking about the elements. And now remember, in those days, it was usually just elements. When we get to Paracelsus, we're going to break them up. But in the old world, if you talked about a disembodied spirit, an elementary, or an elemental, it was just an element. They called them the four elements. But he goes in his writing, wait a minute, he is a church father. And here's the best part. You ready for this? By the thousands, he recruited people from the mystery schools.
He certainly did. Well, the Bible is filled with all kinds of admonishments. I mean, we know Paul in the Bible, didn't he say, we fight not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers of darkness, or the cosmocratorus in higher places. And here's another thing. I think when we look at all these influences and how they're coming at us, it's really interesting, because you could be walking down the street and you see 7 people. And if you see 7 people, you should multiply that by 1,000 for how many are actually around you. Furthermore, on top of that, there is an electromagnetism in it. You've talked about your thoughts. You've talked about a person's type of a being, just like we talk about magnetic and diamagnetic, with something is as repulsing things. If you think about how a submarine works, or people talk about these UFOs going underwater, it works just like when you see trout in the water. They give up, the slime coating around them gives an ambient electrical field that protrudes things. So if you have a higher vibrational auric field and energy field, you're not going to attract these things so much. And I think it's really interesting when people have these sightings in their home. It's usually they see something above their bed, which is a place you spend a lot of time charging your energy, or they see it in the shower, where water is a great conductor of electromagnetic energy. And it's quite interesting that when people talk about these incidents happening in a house or something, someone's either intentionally tried to open that up, or there's been a violent or traumatic incident that's taken place that has torn the fabrics of space-time, maybe caused a neutrino light source to brush up against the fabric of space-time. Things opened up in the room. And a lot of people have found that laying down salt, which, we see an interruption in these electromagnetic fields, or working with elements of water that's been charged, such as in the case of the church using holy water. And in the other areas, we see people using sage, white sage and cedar. Why those? Well, we're changing resonance. We're changing the harmonic aspects. We're literally moving the room into another way. And that's the esoteric sciences have always talked about this, with incenses and candles and such, with the elements.
Right. The church, in its infinite wisdom, listen, if you're looking for perfection in this realm, it doesn't exist. We know, based on what Paracelsus said and others, this is a testing ground. If you don't activate your soul, you're fodder in a spiritual war. You are roadkill if you don't change the frequency of your surrounding. They're going to play on you. They're going to live through you. But now let's take the Bible, because we know that they were all talking about it. The apostles, everyone is talking about it, but they called them the elements or elementals. They basically, even the Bible, it says like 4 or 5 times, turn away from the elements and turn to Christ. I'm like, wait a minute. They knew it then as well. They understood this arching theme. They knew that there were influences in the universe. So, but wait a minute. We've got Clement, who is now, what is he doing? He's teaching. He's a student of the mysteries. He's teaching by the thousands this, again, this lipstick idea, right? It's the same principle, but it's now incorporated into Christianity. But let's go. We're seeing people in the mystery schools, like today, Freemasonry, and they're joining the religion, and they're spreading the idea. They're gonna leave Alexandria. They're gonna go through the Roman Empire, and they're gonna spread the same idea. Now we got one of my other favorites is Augustine of Hippo. Saint. He's a saint, but interesting. Now he's not just a saint; he's a church doctor. And there are only 37 of them. I think I've read about 26 or 7 of them. Okay. They all say the same thing, a little differently, a little lipstick, but same thing. You're never alone. The thoughts you have are not your own. These are the doctors of the church. Now, what did he say? I took a whole class on his book, Confessions. He lays out a confession to God, everything from his youth all the way up until his, he dies. What did he say? He talked about the elements. Okay, he said the elements, and he went on to define them as creatures 78 times in the book Confessions. I looked them up. I'm like, 78 times he talked about creatures, but he only used element once. So he defined it, and then he laid it out. Well, why am I talking about him? Well, he talked about the fact that before he became a Christian, he was in Carthage. He was a member of the mystery schools. He was a Gnostic. Right, exactly. And he did the same thing. He recruited people from the mystery schools in Carthage and Hippo and everywhere else. He literally is spreading this information the same way. But here's the best part. Read his book, and you're going to say, wait a minute. When he was a young man, about 13 or 14, he went to the bathhouses in Carthage, and his father caught him there. He went home to his mom and dad, and they were so happy that he went to the bathhouse. It wasn't to take a bath, by the way. I mean, he was doing aberrant behavior, right? But they thought, oh, we're going to have grandchildren. He said it in his book. He had as a Gnostic, for 17 years, he had a concubine. He would he would do all these worldly activities. And now he says, and then he literally, and this is why it resonated with me. And I went back to my priest and I said, man, I love this book. And he goes, well, why do you like it, Hank? Because it is profound. Every student in the seminary reads it. I said, because I don't feel so bad. I was never as bad as this guy, but he's a saint, and he's a church doctor. And then of course, my priest says, you're going to find something when you read these saints. They were not perfect men. They were just defenders of the faith. That was the key, was a defender of the faith. A lot of times they were angry, but these were real men of a man like John Wayne kind of guys, right? They were tough dudes.
Well, there's an old saying that a friend of mine says. He says, all saints are sinners and all sinners are saints. And you know what's interesting about that too, with this idea of our thoughts and why the mind is so important. And we all get into this trap because, you know, Buddha said everything we are is the result of what we have thought. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, the great theosophist that you're talking about.
What's the source of your thoughts?
That's exactly. Blavatsky, though, she said, let the mind is the great slayer of the real. Let the disciples slay the slayer, meaning the mind makes a better servant than a master. And your mind can make you depressed if you don't train your mind. And it does take discipline. And you are receiving these thoughts. But Hank, I want to also ask you quickly before we finish this episode, and we got another episode to come back on.
I got so much more to tell you.
You have so much more to tell everyone. And
we haven't even got into the elementaries yet.
We haven't even got into the good stuff. We'll throw more into that. I mean, we're going to have to do a whole series here. But have you ever heard of Jose Escamillo, this guy years ago? He's a photographer, and he captured these things called rods. And they were these things that he was able to capture with his camera that were just floating through the air. And you might say that we're being visited by these forms, almost like you could say fish that are coming, like those guppies that you see in a fish tank. They're coming here like electromagnetic life forms that are just feeding off of us, eating away at all the debris, attaching onto things. We are going to find in the years to come, as we move into these various technologies, and I've said this before to people many times, we are literally experimenting. We have put nanoparticles into the lungs of soldiers. So that's been around for a while, so they could breathe underwater for over an hour. And if everyone look this up, we have actually taken nanoparticles, which are the silicon hexagonal structures that are about 1 atom thick, and we've injected them into the eyeballs of mice, so mice can see into the infrared. We know that we're moving into that for human eyes in these certain programs. So we will be able to see beyond this, and we are going to be very surprised that there's a whole science that we've ignored that is right in front of us.
So let me just finish on this overarching idea. And
please finish.
You're seeing it, and obviously in the church. You're never alone. The thoughts you have are not your own. They're talking about the elementals. By 1200, they're redefining them as devils and demons. The time you get to Paracelsus, which is the Swiss Hermes, by the way, devout Catholic. And let me touch on that real quick.
Catholic just means universal, right?
That's right. It's a universal idea, universal religion. So you have Paracelsus, who is Catholic. You have Helena Blavatsky. She's Russian Orthodox Catholic. You got Eliphas Levi. He's Catholic. You got Charles Ledbetter. He's an Anglican, which is basically Catholic. It's just a split from the church. And then you've got, oh my God, well, Helena Blavatsky, but Albert Pike, right? Episcopalian. What's that? American Anglican. And then you've got Manly P. Hall. A lot of people think he's not a Christian. He was a Christian minister in the 1920s.
That's right.
He was teaching, he was a comparative religion in 1923. We know that. We saw the flyers at a Methodist church in Los Angeles. Was he a Methodist? I'm not sure. Maybe, but he was a ordained minister.
Certainly was.
These were very spiritual people, and we're seeing that influence again through Catholicism, the original church, and then literally it springs out from there. It's not a new idea, right? We're just recycling. So, but they're changing the name, elements to creatures, to devils and demons, not devil. Demon. A lot of churches will say, "Oh, he's the devil." They mean devils. Yeah, the plural part of it, the demons. There's more. They're legion. There's an infinite amount. Paracelsus, a Swiss doctor and a spiritualist, he did not separate the two. He understood that these entities were influencing their health, and he didn't want to separate them. That's why you have churches like or hospitals like Loma Linda. They encourage prayer because we know that the recovery rate of those people who are spiritually, and whether they allow their priest or their pastor or whatever to come in and pray with them, they encourage it because the recovery is like 300 times more than the secular non-believer.
People can look this up. There's a Catholic doctor named Dr. Bogislaw, and he did a study on prayer. And he also was measuring electromagnetic fields around people in groups that were praying. And they also measured people who were prayed over versus people who were not prayed over. And the recovery time was significantly better for those who were prayed over.
Also, so you got Paracelsus. Now, what are some of the themes that he talked about? Infinite amount of dimensions, infinite amount of spirit types. They're of a different courses. They come and go. He said they were created by God to test us. And they're in essence, they will do what, they don't have a soul, but they're attracted to our soul. They will attach to, if a non-activated soul, they will attach to that soul. If you don't vibrate that thing, they will attach to it, and they will actually live in the astral after you die. This is where the church comes up with this idea of purgatory and hell. Right? Purgatory is a resting place. The spirits can't get you until you're judged. That's for the worthy. If you haven't activated it, it's called hell. And hell is just a separation from God. These entities are still attached to you, and they live vicariously, and they can, that's why they call them bicorporal. They literally will live in multiple entities. And now this is interesting, and we'll talk more about it when we get into disembodied spirits, this idea of a collective consciousness. Now, even the church talks about when you talk to one angel, you talk to all of them. Well, there's something in the other part as well. There's a collectiveness. So don't let, just because you're in contact with, I'm in contact with the collective consciousness of the world, the Akasha, there's good and bad, right? Good and bad. And you got to balance the two. So real quick, I know we're running out of time, so I want to just touch on a couple things. One is the elementaries are best described, again, by Paracelsus. He defined them as multi or interdimensional parasites. Some people have even referred to them as vampires. And we know, for example, that in the old world, they didn't bury people right away because they thought they were dead, and they would, 3 days later, they would come back, or the body would never rot. So if the body didn't rot, they would do what? They would take a stake and put it through the heart to try to separate the spirits from that. And then, of course, we know, for example, if you're on a bed, you die. We've seen the gaseous substance leave. We've also weighed the body afterwards, right? And it's lighter. So something leaves. May I suggest it's not just the soul. It's also the other entities that are leaving or exiting. And they may, in fact, stay attached to the soul when it leaves. Helena Blavatsky talked about it. In fact, J.D. Buck, a Freemason, he wrote Mystic Masonry, 33 degree.
Great book.
Great book. He wrote about how these entities attach to your thoughts and how they live on. And Helena Blavatsky does it as well. She writes about vampirism, bicorporal entities, and so forth. She basically said that the subconscious mind, your thoughts, is the pathway to the spirit world, how they attach themselves and how you set yourself free. And that's important. So you have these elements. Now, real quick, I told you about a year ago, I've told you maybe 5 years ago, that I was in contact with what I like to call them as white lights, right? They were entities, but they were like white, yeah. And I didn't know, I didn't get until I got confirmation. Now that I have confirmation, I know what they were. They are essentially angels, right? The church would call them angels. The esoteric sciences will call them the Great White Brotherhood. I asked them, I said, hey, are you the Great White Brotherhood? They said, yeah. Do you go by other names? They go, yeah. And I said, well, Christians like to call you guys angels. Oh, yeah, we go by that too. I said, okay, you can. Once you learn how to free yourself up, you can communicate with them through your thoughts. And so, no, I'm not ready for the white jacket, but it takes a little bit of use to when you're awakened to this idea. So about a year ago, I told you this privately, and I appreciate you keeping that private, but I'm going to come out and talk about it publicly, because now that I know what it means, they took me to a place. They put me on a table. The room is full of these light beings, angels, and they removed two long objects from my temple. Remember the temple? The temples, right? And they were long and black. And I remember asking them, I said, are those parasites? I'm sorry, are those snakes? And they said, no, they're parasites. And I went, how long are they? And they said between 3 and 4 foot long. I wake up and a cold sweat. I go to the computer. I literally look it up and I'm going, oh, people are calling them astroparasites. And they're different, they're various names and so forth, but they attach based on vibration. They live vicariously through you. And there's also warnings to people. Don't try to get rid of them, like have somebody try to get rid of them unless they are spiritually pure, because when they get rid of you, they'll go to that person. And so there's a big warning that they gave on that one page I read. So we know that now that I know what they are, and now I'm studying Paracelsus and Helena Blavatsky and all these other great authors that are writing it, you have the key of understanding, you know what they are. Now, real quick, I know people want to dismiss this stuff, but this is how it interacts. And this is the last point I want to make. It might take a couple minutes, but we know I have multiple degrees. One of us is a master's in education. And so I am very aware of the education system. So I was told some very interesting things about how we're taught how to interact with them within our own system. We don't know it. It's right there. So I don't know about Canada, where you're from, but in the United States, your primary education system is called elementary school. And people go, oh, that's just a coincidence. Well, remember, most education in the United States in particular, but other parts of the world as well, were done by religious or missionary people.
That's right. John Amos Kamensky, the great father of education, the Moravian.
Right. They all had moral instruction, whatever religion it was. Catholics were really good at it. And I'm going to tell you about my Catholic experience when I was in elementary school. So people were like, well, that's a coincidence. Okay, well, how long did God take to create the universe? Was it 6 days? Oh, 6 is the end of completion. How many years in elementary school? They could have picked 5, they could have picked 7, but they picked 6. Elementary, they called it elementary, and we have 6 years of elementary training. And they understood that you needed that moral instruction. So you got wokeism groups today, they're attacking what? Elementary school. They know as well. You get the children, you destroy culture, right? Absolutely. Just as it was built, you destroy it. All right. Now, I know that's not enough. Let's dig a little bit deeper. Okay. So you've got, okay. So I'm in elementary school and Catholic school, right? A couple of years. Most of my time I was in public school. We couldn't always afford it. So I'm in there. I got the sister up there. We get up to the sister and she'll say, hey, oh, Hank, what's 3 times 3? Or we do multiplications, right? And I'll say 8. And of course it's wrong. And she'll say, stick out your hand. And what does she do with the hand? She takes the ruler and she slaps you. Why did she slap me? She wasn't talking to me. She was talking to the spirit, or the spirits inside of me that were feeding me the wrong information. The thoughts are not your own. You see what I'm saying? You're training the spirit, because Paracelsus also said that these are you either create them or you attach yourself to them. So they're already there, or you're creating them. So what is elementary school? You're creating or attaching yourself during elementary school for 6 years. You get up to the sister, she slaps you. There's no reason to slap you on the hand. She's not talking to you, she's talking to the spirit. Okay, well, I know that's not enough. Let's go a little further. Let's go to, in elementary school, they're lettering, right? Okay, so you have letters, A, B, C, D. Then they're going to teach you how to spell a word. Wait a minute, a spell.
Spelling. It's like a magic spell.
It's a spell. How did God create the universe? He had a thought, he breathed it into existence. We do the same thing. Thought comes into our head, we speak it. And you create a word is a thought. There is no distinction between
in the beginning. There was the word.
We're always looking for the lost master's word, right? Same thing, right? It's the word. We're always looking for the word, which is God, Jehovah. It's no big secret. It's just God, Yahweh, whatever. Right? People, they can take it and run with it however they want. But you get my point, okay? So wait a minute. They're teaching you how to create a spell. But if you go with Eliphas Levi, the history of magic, he says white magic would be considered Christianity today. Prior to Christianity, it was just white magic. Black magic is not good. It's bad. We might call that demonic or Satanism today, right? But they understood as good and bad in the ancient world. Good would be what? A good spell. Bad would be a bad spell. We're doing spells all the time. Every word we have has power. Okay, I know that's not enough. Oh, you need more. What do they do in elementary school? They teach you, at least they did when I was a kid. Oh, we had to pray, right? Of course, you had the 10 commandments. You had to pray. You had to go to mass. You had to do all these things, right? Absolutely. You have these rituals. They're important in elementary school, that early formation, okay? We don't do it today, but you see how our society is ending up. Wait a minute, prayer? Who are you speaking to? Because right, it's a thought. Who are you? If it doesn't matter if the kid believes it or not right now, but it sets the foundation for the rest of his life. So right. Prayer isn't important.
I think this is the thing about prayer. A lot of people hear all these beautiful sounding prayers full of historicity, and they sound very sanctimonious, and people repeat them at repetition. But we know for a fact that prayer allows for the psychological integration of experiences, but also energy follows thought. So if you are directing your thought towards things, it's a very powerful instrument. Look at its tenets that are taught not only in Buddhism, Om Mani Padme Om, all the chants you have over in Hinduism. Absolutely. You have it in Christianity, Judaism. You have it in the Quran. You have it constantly in the Quran. If you're a Muslim, you have to pray 5 times a day.
Absolutely. It's a rebranding. It's just a rebranding of the same idea. You're never alone. The thoughts you have your own. I just got a better way to keep you safe. So prayer isn't important. Well, in England, they just arrested a woman. They walked up to her. She's standing in front of an abortion clinic. And they said, "What are you doing?" She goes, "I'm silently praying to myself." Turn around. We're going to arrest you. You can't pray in front of an abortion clinic silently. I'm not offending. I'm not yelling at anyone. I'm letting them come and go. I'm just doing this. That's the power. Governments are afraid of prayer. They're afraid of the name Jesus Christ. They don't want, even in a city council, in school, they don't want any of it because they want to allow the spirits to have free reign over, in particular, during elementary school. All right, that's not enough. Okay, how about manifestation? Every word that you speak is powerful, right? The power of words. Well, just look at our politicians, how they warp the usage of words and confuse people, right? Absolutely. These are, by the way, they're not doing it on their own. The thoughts are not your own. You're never alone. The thoughts are not your own. You're feeding some entity. And all you have to do is their behavior moral? Is their words moral? And by the way, I do it all the time. Oh, Hank, I love what your videos and so forth. I got one question for you. What's morality? These are young people who you were blessed. I know we talked about you were raised in a devout Christian household, right? Everything was evil. I had to go 3 times a week and all day on Sunday. Look at me. I'm not harmed by it. But young people today, particularly during elementary, the reason a 6-year-old will shoot the teacher is because no moral instruction. Go back to Carl Jung. Without the morality of religion, I don't care what your religion is. If you don't have morality, they go crazy. You will go crazy without that morality.
Hank, I want to thank you. Let me just cut that. Hank, I want to thank you so much for sharing with us today. And I know we have a lot more to discuss on our next episode, which you will be coming back for, to tell the folks at home on how they can control their thoughts to understand more about the type of thoughts they're having, as well as we're going to get into some of these other energetic life forms and beings that will be very fascinating. I'm going to urge everyone to check out the links below. Hank has books on Amazon. He is not only coming with us on the Ancient Mysteries of Egypt tour in March 2023. You don't want to miss that. This is going to be very exciting. But I will also urge you all to like, subscribe, comment down below, and share this video with your friends. And we'll talk to you all in the next episode.
Thank you, Johnny.